individual skills are essential. When you work in the space of getting the best out of the team that you lead, it's far more complex, it's far more dynamic, it's far more nuanced.
The teams and the team leaders are facing challenges based on speed and ambition and growth.
I was running a performance function in a big HR organization at a big FTSE 100. And the CEO of that division, he called us human remains versus human resources.
Here's a pre-show scenario for you. Imagine you had to visit 16 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and pans, one has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate the same way, using 16 different tools to hire, pay, manage, and develop their workforce. But now there's one platform that does it all, Deel. That's Deel. Deel is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel works for your entire team. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deel today. That's Deel. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're specialist HR recruiters with offices in the UK, Europe, and now the US as well. And today we're going to be diving into the world of team development, team dynamics, and the inner and outer habits. You may be wondering what those are. Don't worry, we're going to be talking about those during the course of today's show. But let's just say, I think my guests will agree, that they're absolutely vital for ultimate team success. And yet they're often overlooked. Often when we think about performance, we think about leadership development only, which is why I'm thrilled to welcome not one, but two special guests today, absolute experts to the show. Joining me from Meta Team are Rob Shaw, who's co-founder of Meta Team, and we'll find out more about Meta during the course of today's episode, and Andy Perkins as well, a seasoned leader in learning and development with experience that spans nearly 35 years across multiple global markets. Now, today they're going to be sharing with me their insights into data-driven team development, really getting into the detail, something I know all of my listeners absolutely love. We're also going to be talking about the inner and the outer game of teams and habits and why these areas are absolutely critical for organizations that really do want to maximize both performance and resilience, two things we really need in today's markets in the world of HR. So if you're interested in taking team dynamics to the next level, you're in great hands. Let's unpack everything we can in relation to team development insights. And I welcome Rob Shaw and Andy Perkins to the HR L&D Podcast. How are you both?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, very good, Nick.
Delighted to have you both here. For full transparency, I have to say to all of my listeners, I am a complete Meta convert, so much so that I've been through the Diagnostics thing that they offer. I've become certified myself. I'm absolutely excited and enthralled and intrigued by the research that really does back Meta. And I think my listeners are going to be on the same journey I was when they discover more about it. So we're going to jump into what Meta is and all about those habits. But before we do, let me start with this first question. I'm going to come to you for this one, Rob. What do the words human resources mean to you?
Thanks, Nick. Great question. I go back to a pretty formative period in my life. It was 12 years ago. I was running a sort of performance function in a big HR organization at a big FTSE 100. And the CEO of that division, he called us human remains versus human resources. And his framing was actually, how do you enable this organization and the people in it to truly grow and transform and to become bigger versions of themselves versus constrained and smaller versions of themselves. So, and it really hurt at the time because we were working really hard, but also there was a really significant kind of point beneath his badge as he gave it to us of actually, I think so. Human resources is when it's at its best, it is that enabler of growth and that enabler of how do the people in the organization that work here become bigger versions of themselves in whatever shape and form that is, whether that's through pay, through reward, through diversity, through inclusion, etc. So for me, it's absolutely not human remains. It's about that growth and potential.
Okay, well, great place to start. Well, let's focus in on that growth element then, because in order to grow, particularly in the world of HR, we often have to overcome a number of significant challenges. We're often plates spinning. You mentioned a few areas there: diversity, inclusion on one side, organizational development on the other, leadership development on another. So, what do you think at the moment is the greatest challenge, Rob, that team leaders are really facing, both at the moment and probably over the next 12 months or so as well?
I'm noticing, Nick, there's a real lack of fun, right? There's a real lack of enjoyment. There's a real lack of I'm relishing and cherishing this opportunity of stepping into increased accountability, responsibility to lead teams. And I think we see this in data about, engagement scores, etc. So my hypothesis is there's this real gap growing between expectations and needs and demands on team leaders and their actual ability to know, how do I unlock the potential and reduce the interference of the teams I lead. So I see this strain increasing, and I see that evidenced in lots of research about whether it's we have to adapt to being in the office more than we were post-COVID. We have to adapt to levels of engagement and burn and unhappiness and stress that seems to be increasing in the workforce. We have to adapt quickly to the degree of technology change or the market or the change in, the US tariffs, which may be coming down the road, et cetera, et cetera. So this strain of having to adapt, this change in expectations, and I think that's a really, really difficult place for team leaders to be. And I don't think the tools and the wherewithal and the methods and the ability to work through that is available enough.
It's hard for me not to agree with you. I know that when I deal with HR directors or managers, often the word I hear at the moment is, Nick, it's like Groundhog Day. Like every day we're dealing with new complex challenges. We're trying to maintain our competitive advantage, but I'm doing the same thing. I haven't got the opportunity to lift my head up. It's not fun anymore. It's not what I signed up to do. So Andy, if I come to you, because I know this is something you hear with the community of HR professionals that I know you work with across the globe, actually, how can we use team development, I guess, to address that challenge? Because it's not easy.
Well, I think coming back to something that Rob was talking about, I do a lot of work in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, the teams and the team leaders are facing challenges based upon speed and ambition and growth. I mean, the Middle Eastern countries are building and growing so fast that the teams are having to actually step up and grow, and at the same time face up to what they call in the region localization, where they are working more and more and more with their local talent, so they are less and less dependent on expat talent. And that means you have very young team leaders within your teams, and they're having to face up these hugely ambitious growth targets. So team development in that situation becomes very, very relevant, because the teams are often working so hard, they don't have enough time to actually work on themselves. They don't have enough time to actually step back and say, could we do this work in a more smart way? Could we actually work together more collaboratively? How are we working with our stakeholders? And I think when you get that, team development to me is actually taking the time to reflect on how you can actually be better, how you can actually grow to actually support your stakeholders' expectations.
I think that raises an interesting question, because you mentioned then a lot of the leaders are often very young, and often we're thrust into these positions. It's difficult. So you find that companies in return then, they recognize it's a problem, but they invest in leadership development, not necessarily team development. And you mentioned then as well, we got to actually invest in more than just the leader. It's the team that really helps to move the needle, that really performance is ingrained in. So I'll come back to you, Rob. I can see you nodding there. Why do you think this is? Why do you think people are so heavily invested in the leadership side of things, which of course is important, but not so much in the team side?
I think there's a underlying belief that strong leaders naturally translate into high-performing teams. And whilst absolutely, I think individual skills are essential, you move when you work in in the space of getting the best out of the team that you lead, it's far more complex. It's far more dynamic. It's far more nuanced, and it's the nature of the work is far more emergent. That's difficult to train out in kind of traditional sort of leadership development spaces, because it's so driven by the context, and it's so driven by where the team is, how the team is showing up, what discussions are the team having at that point in time. It's very difficult to train that stuff out through, e-learning or leadership programs, in my opinion.
And Andy, I can see you nodding as he's giving the response. I know that obviously Meta Team is very much backed by science. I'm a bit of a research nerd, so I really enjoy just reading about the research and what it told us, and actually really opened my eyes to some things. But Meta Team have kind of used that research, haven't they, to develop its own approach. So how does the Meta Team product challenge this norm, challenge the things that I guess we've come to expect as being normal, and why is it necessary to challenge it at all? Tell us a little bit more.
I think that, it's really based on what Rob was saying. Rob led a piece of very significant research looking at the behaviors of 1,200 teams. And he led McKinsey's and Harvard in this research to see, could you correlate the behaviors of successful teams, and could you then build a behavioral framework? And I think that's really where Meta Team does stand out, because what we do is, and Rob will talk about this in more detail later, we have a diagnostic, takes into account the views of the team leader, the team leader's boss, and the stakeholders, but within the context of this behavioral framework. And I think that's very powerful data, because it's not as if the team can say, oh, that's what you say. They are the content. They can't deny what's in front of them when you've actually got this aggregated heat map about their own behaviors. And it then leads and drives the development journey.
I guess it allows you to give you that, I mentioned in the introduction, that data-driven approach to team developments. Tell me a little bit more about that, Rob, and for those interested, by the way, there will be a link in the show notes. You can really read the research. It's fascinating. If you're interested in HR, you're interested in team development, it's really fascinating reading. But tell us a little bit more about that data-driven approach to team development then, Rob, because it's really fascinating.
I think, almost start with the opposite, Nick. Our view is guesswork is just not the right answer with something as complex and important as team dynamics. So you have to ground the work on a really solid basis to build the commitment to what we call don't spook the elephant. Doing team development is gradual. It takes a lot of effort. You have to do it over time. There's no quick fix. And it's very easy to spook the elephant if you start with guesswork, and it's just not fitting. So we shun that perspective. We don't do sort of generic kind of guesswork based interventions. We look both inside out and outside in. And I think a team has to get data and perspective about, as we look from the inside of the team out, where do we think our relative strengths are and where are our gaps? And we also think it's critical to look outside in. What are the key people that we work with and we serve, or who work for us? What's their outside in perspective on how we operate, on our behaviors and our most important habits? And we bring those perspectives and we then can compare it against our global norm groups, et cetera, to look at what are the relative strengths and gaps that we have as a team, using that inside out and outside in perspective. And our view is that's just, it doesn't take away all the guesswork, Nick, I think it's really important to say, but it takes away a huge amount of the guesswork about this is where we are and where do we start this work. Most importantly, so we can commit to the journey, we can stay on the journey, and we don't kind of spook that elephant so it races off and never to be seen again.
So I think it's quite interesting, because from my perspective, I hear all the time about some of the challenges that organizations are faced with, and often they'll need to create an intervention to support that. And as you know, I work as a coach as well, and sometimes I'll say, an HRD might say to me, Nick, we've got a problem in our business with culture, or my senior leaders can't influence their teams, and this is a real problem. But what's really interesting, that's their view of what the problem is. And often they'll then create an intervention that's based on what is their view. But actually, when I'm looking at your research, when you get underneath the hood, it's often not the fact that the team have a problem influencing. It's a problem with adaptability. Or it's a problem with trust, or there's a problem somewhere else in the chain. And that's where I find it really interesting, is often the interventions are provided to an organization and delivered, and sometimes to the best of an organization's ability, but they're delivering an intervention that isn't really cutting to what the problem was in the first place. So with that in mind, Andy, tell us a little bit more about why a data-driven approach like this makes it also a lot more sustainable, because I know you can measure things over time as well, and you can also measure the improvements.
Well, Nick, I've written about this before, and I used to run a leadership development company for about 12 years, and our whole mantra was, if the learning stays in the classroom, in the workshop, on the screen, then it's a cost. If the learning transfers back into the workplace and actually drives change, it's an investment. And that is a really different way of looking at the budget underpinning team development. So we make sure that the learning interventions that we deliver are integrated, as Rob was saying, into the diagnostic results. The learning interventions are immersive, they're experiential, they're commercially relevant. They are about the collective team. And that then helps to drive sustainable impact back into the workplace. And we don't just sort of leave it to chance. 6 months after a series of development interventions, we will rerun the diagnostic. We call it the team profiler. We will rerun the profiler and actually compare the actual results from the first diagnostic to the second diagnostic to actually see the behavioral change. And I think Rob will actually explain. What you can actually find sometimes is you see significant improvement in the behavior that you've been focusing on, but you also see improvements on other behaviors because of the correlation between one behavior and another. And I think Rob could actually expand on that much better than I can.
Yeah, just give you an example, Nick. So you talked about, senior leadership group. We're really struggling to get the influence we need of our people, right? So we have one of our behaviors is influencing. We would not typically start there. We would look at how strong is the purpose that this team shares. How strong is the mutual accountability that brings that purpose to life? So how aligned is the team on why? Are expectations clear? How is that communicated and aligned into the organization? How do we coach and adjust? And how robust are the consequences that sit around the purpose that we wish to do? So, we find typically with a big client recently, there was struggle with influencing. Actually, we thought the root cause was around there was a gap in elements of their mutual accountability. So we work on that. Then we reprofile. Influencing comes up once you've got those elements in place. So in essence, we use the diagnostic to really try and get to the nub of what is causing some of the pains or the obstacles or the challenges that the senior leaders or the teams are facing, and intervene there versus at the symptoms.
I mean, that certainly makes sense from my perspective. It's very difficult to influence someone into something you don't believe in. So it makes sense, therefore, to start with purpose. So that but I guess the obvious thing would be, let's focus on influencing. But you got to know what, you got to believe in what you're doing.
Absolutely. We have others. So, we have other teams where actually they come to us, Rob, we are not taking action at the speed we need to. So how do we go faster? In essence, is the challenge. How do we get more done more quickly with the same resource that we currently have? So that's the presenting issue. Typically, actually, we find the cause of slowness is lack of trust within the team. So we would work on, are we having the tough conversations we need to around the big issues to remove the blockages and the barriers out of the way so we can increase flow? So we don't try and sort of push more sort of water down the river. We just try and remove the rocks that potentially are in the way and then the river just flows better by itself. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I had Stephen Covey on the show in the past, and he said if you want a team to move quickly, first you need to find trust, and then you can inspire them to move at any pace you wish. So again, it kind of correlates to previous guests we've had on the show and their wisdom as well. Rob, can you tell me a little bit more about the inner and the outer game? The habits, something there's 8 in particular I know you'd like to bring to life. It'd be great to bring these down for our listeners, just so they've got a better understanding of perhaps where some of the blockages are even within their own organizations, perhaps some habits they haven't even considered, maybe behind some of the obstacles that they're trying to overcome. Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 5-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jjrecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more.
We have this inner and outer game, and all of our research shows the best teams are continually trying to master both, and you can't be lopsided. Yeah, we've never come across a team that's good at one and not the other. And similarly, we've never come across a team that's bad at one and not bad at the other. So there's real balance and connection and cohesion between them. The inner game, in essence, manifests in the outer game. So the inner game is how strong is the level of trust that the team shares, and how productive is the trust used in terms of we leverage the different expertise that we have around the table. We get everything out of the potential we've got. And we deal with the really tough conversations that we need to, that are going to move us forward. So trust is a key one. Some teams we have that have elements of high trust, but it can be what I would call artificial harmony, Nick. So it isn't then used productively to help drive for impact. The next key in a habit is resilience. And in essence, this is how do we overcome what's getting in the way? How do we kind of build the energy that we need to thrive and succeed? How do we support each other in a way that it's not about a rugged individual it's actually about a fully resourced group of people who can really drive the agenda forward? We talked about purpose. We think that's in a game. How clear is our purpose? And very importantly, how strong is the mutual accountability that sits around it? And then our fourth inner game habit is focus, which is how do we prioritize? How do we match resources? And e.g., you can see how you need to have trust in order to have strong levels of focus. That needs to be grounded in a really good purpose, right? So those are the 4 inner habits, which then manifest in the outer game. So the outer game, we move into, in essence, how does this team influence and be influenced and have an impact in its wider environment? So it's a different orientation. It's grounded in different science, and it's highly related to the inner game. So how does the team adapt? So the team's ability to adapt to its environment, to reflect, to learn, and to focus in on how it needs to improve to deliver the results that it wishes to do is one of our foundational habits. We look at influencing, which we talked about. It's are we building the depth of relationship, and we're getting the support we need, and do we deeply understand what our stakeholders and influencers want from us is key. We have a third outer habit, which is we call agility. And for us, this is really about how strong are we as a team at creating value for tomorrow versus values for today? So are we seeing the big picture? Are we joining up the dots in an innovative way? Are we creating new value and bringing that to the table for our customers, our clients, for the organizations that we serve? And then the last habit, which almost comes at the end of the chain for us, which is, and how good are we therefore making decisions and taking action? So those 4 outer habits are kind of driven and enabled by the inner habits. But team development, our experiences, you need to dance between these two. You can't just do lopsided development, just focusing on one side or the other. We've got the best results and we make the greatest level of improvement when we're able to create this balance between working on a little bit of inner, one step after the other, sort of inner, outer, inner, outer. That's how we found we really transform a team's cohesion, engagement, motivation, and ultimately performance.
There's something quite interesting here as well, and particularly for HR professionals that really want to move from HRD into a CEO role, or certainly get a bigger voice at the C-suite, because you find when you look at those outer game things you mentioned there, adapting, agility, influencing, taking action, these are things often that your senior stakeholders will say, this is what I need you to do. This is the outcome I require. But of course, if we've got to focus on a different way in order to get to that outcome. And that's where the inner game comes in. And it's almost like that's the out part of the business, but the inner part in the workings of our company require more trust, more purpose. Let's look at our values. Let's look at how resilient we are to change. Are we focused, and all those things? So for me, it kind of makes sense, but it's actually a really good strategic way for HR people listening to this to go, hey, I know we've got to get to this point for our C-suite. This is their broader strategic objective. But we need to look at our inner game, these 4 habits, and is there any of these areas that's causing us that blockage? So that makes sense to us. But from your perspective, Andy, if an HR professional is listening to this and they recognize there's a blind spot there, maybe in both their inner and their outer game, what kind of tools can they utilize within Meta Team to help facilitate the process of improvement then to get that outcome for their stakeholders?
I come back to starting point of our team profiler. I think the team profiler is basically a 360 survey. And I think just by running our 360 survey is a great catalyst for reflection and conversation. You know, regardless of the development, just by getting a team to look quite coldly at what do our stakeholders think of us? What does our team leader think of the team collectively, not of any individuals? What does the team leader's boss think of this team? And what do we think? And I think those inputs into a team, if I was an HR professional, I would be trying to get my business critical teams into this type of, if you like, genuine honesty, reflection, and discussion about where the gaps are, where the blind spots. It's not always about blind spots. It's not always about dysfunctionality. It's about where the areas where we could grow and grow better as a team. I do think that's the starting point.
That's good. I've got a question then. This brings to mind with that response, Andy. I'll come to you first, Rob, but I imagine, Andy, you're going to have a view on this. In the world of HR, in fact, with all organizational functions at the minute, there's a real investment being put into technology. You know, we're seeing AI driven this, that, and the other that are really going to revolutionize performance. And I think with all these bells and whistles type solutions that we're being, hit with left, right, and center, it can be easy for an HR professional or any kind of stakeholder that has a budget to say, you know what, our quickest route to success, our quickest route to improvement or to results is to buy that new AI-driven, in inverted commas, solution to get there. But I'd love to know from your research and what you're seeing in the market, is that necessarily the first place we should be leveling our investment? Should we be spending first on our teams and identifying where there may be blockages in our own team performance or our own team dynamics? Or should it be we work in harmony with new tech? Or, I wonder if there's a process that the research tells us. It says, actually, before we do anything, we probably need to do this.
I think, thanks, great question. I think it's really dependent on what's the type of challenge that we're trying to solve for, would be my starting point. Where it's around good practice, best practice, I think investment in AI, generative AI, natural language programming is a brilliant thing to do. Right, and it's super efficient, and there's huge gains that come from it. However, I think when you move into a world where it's much more emergent, it's far more dynamic, it's far more complex, I think the AI isn't the optimal intervention solution for those types of issues and challenges. And Meta Team, we play in those more emergent, more sort of complex, dynamic environments where you have to drive a level of reflection. You have to then use that to. We're trying to switch off autopilot. There's such cognitive bandwidth issues, I think, for the leaders we work with. They're just so busy. They have such little bandwidth, right? And therefore they rely on autopilot. 43, 50% of our behaviors are just all triggered from the unconscious. And it's potentially some of those are actually not helping us grow and perform and flow at the rate we need to. And so our view is an approach such as Meta Teams, which goes to a level of depth and explores that space, is very powerful in conjunction with investing in generative AI for good practice, best practice challenges. So that's how I do. So I think it's the blend, right? My view is it's like, are we bringing the right type of intervention to the right challenge? And if we are, we've seriously increased our chances of success.
Sure. And I see you nodding, Andy. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the one thing I would say is that every team is unique. Every team's challenges are unique, and every team's landscape, if you like, is unique for that team. And I think that the way we approach the diagnostic takes away intentional and unintentional bias, and it really does give a unique picture of the team's behaviors from the opinions of these four key constituents. And I think that's where AI would struggle. At the moment, I'm talking about AI as of today. AI in a year's time or 2 years' time will be totally different. But I'm talking about valuing the uniqueness of the team is essential, I think, for helping teams to grow. I don't think you can generalize.
No, I think I don't know if this is completely relevant, but it made me think of a saying where it says, those that work with their hands is a laborer. Someone who works with their hand and their head is a craftsman. And for me, that's where you can craft if you're using, AI, that's great. But when you use your hands, your head, and your heart, you become an artist. And I think that's where you've got to try and, as Rob said, bring these things together and work collaboratively with them. And you've mentioned the team performance profile a few times. It's obviously a core part of what Meta Team offers. Can you walk us a little bit through what that profiler is? You've mentioned it a couple of times. I want to make sure people are really crystal clear on that process, what that, maybe you called it diagnostic as well, just so people understand how that process, how you go through that process and the kind of results perhaps they may get at the back end of it.
Let me put this up, Nick. So it's a very simple online tool. We ask the 4 respondent groups to respond to 32 questions, which are rated on a 0 to 10 scale. The quickest that we've had a team do this is 24 hours. And for example, one of our most recent clients was 524 leaders, and it took them 10 days. So it's a very efficient sort of technology enabled capturing of perspectives of the team. We then take that analysis, that inputs, we analyze it, compare it against our global norm groups, and then we debrief the results to the team leader and the team as a starting point for the journey, as a starting point for the development journey. So we focus on the strengths, we focus on any blind spots, we focus on hidden strengths. We're really looking at, are there any unconscious behaviors that maybe are surfacing that are used up and actually may no longer use the team based on where it is now and what challenges it's facing. So we use that process to drive this, in essence, reflection and action, Andy said, because just reflection without action is unproductive, but the opposite's also true. Action without grounded in some reflection and insight is also equally as unproductive. So we try to bring both of those through the diagnostic process, which is quick, efficient, online. And that's really where we start then the deeper work with teams to say what is getting in our way, what are we attached to, which maybe no longer of use to us? What fear may be driving with the conversations we're not happening? That then drives growth for the teams that we work with.
And you mentioned there were 4 groups. I want to be really clear that people understand what those groups are, because for me, this is where it gets really interesting. Because there's an example here. If you have a stakeholder, let's say the CEO is involved in the study, this is where quite uncomfortably, potentially, the CEO may discover actually that one of the barriers is a lack of trust looking upwards. It means that everyone is involved in this, providing they're within the group. So tell me a little bit more about the 4 groups that you mentioned at the start. Typically, you would have involved in the profiling.
Yeah, so we start with the core, which is the team members. So that's one. So who are the team members who make up this team? We would ask their team leader, and we would ask the team leader's boss, which could be the CEO, it could be the chairman, it could be somebody else. So those 3, and then the 4th constituent is key stakeholders, influencers who know this team well and are influenced and have an influence on the team. It could be, so the stakeholders could be direct reports, it could be other sort of management committee members, it could be other peers that work in the organization. And the teams have the ability to choose that themselves. But I think it's a really important, Nick. We typically find there can be some disruption and misalignment by getting those different perspectives, which is so it becomes clear that there's tension. It becomes clear that there's different maybe expectations, but actually having that insight is such a great place to start the work of what do we work on as a team and how do we get better. And that's what we my view is if there is difference, great, let's work with that and use that for our advantage versus try not to look and notice that it's there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to raise, because often you have organizations trying to put plasters over things. They don't want to admit it. They don't want something to come out in the open because they're worried about what it may happen as a result. And of course, this brings everything out into the open in kind of a safe environment, really. Everyone can look and analyze and take a strategic approach to improving the problem. Now, Andy, I want to come to you because you've got 35 years working in learning and development, working with different organizations, delivering a whole host of different types of learning interventions. Why is this particular dilly different now then? Why are we talking about this on today's show? How does it differ from some of the more traditional development programs that perhaps many of our listeners will be more familiar with?
I've never come across, and I've always wanted to find a team, and I'm going to use the word diagnostic for now, a team diagnostic which is integrated into a development pathway. And I think that's what makes it unique. There are many team surveys in the marketplace. I think ours is particularly strong, but there are many. And I have seen many team development or so-called team development, ranging from ropes and barrels at Sandhurst for team building, right the way through to, quite intricate team development. I have never seen anything in the marketplace which actually links the views of those 4 constituents brought together in a very aggregated heat map that then recommends for the team the development pathway they should be following. Where should they start? Which behavior should they be focusing on first? And I think that's what that's why MetaTeam is unique in the marketplace, And we've even made it even more unique by bringing out an Arab version for the Middle East and a Greek version, and we've got many other versions coming. So it's not just an English survey.
Sure. I know it's been endorsed and supported by some leading providers out there as well, Thomas International being a recent one. I have to ask a question here for you, Rob, because I know many of our listeners are going to be speak on their behalf, probably have some issues in relation to adaptability and maybe resilience. And we know that they're really important traits for today's teams. The current market's really, really difficult and competitive. So with those examples, I wonder if I could just ask you, what would be MetaTeam's approach to building those qualities? What role would team dynamics play in achieving results that would improve perhaps potential areas of weakness in those 2 particular areas?
Yeah, interestingly, Nick, very few teams, we've had thousands of teams have been through the diagnostic, very few teams score well at adapting. Resilience can be, generally the teams score stronger, but there are some gaps. So the interventions are quite different. So when we work with teams on adapting, it starts with this, actually, let's give ourselves the time and space to actually reflect at a level of depth about what's going on here and what's getting in the way of us adjusting and adapting as best we possibly can, aligning around what's most important, and then we go at it fast. And to give you an example, when we do the team debrief, we ask the team to say, of our 8 habits, our 4 inner, 4 outer habits, which one do you think is most important for this team to work on? And pretty much every time we've done it, every one of our 8 habits is chosen by somebody in the team. So it's very difficult. You just don't get a team to rely on, this is what's most important, and then this is what we're going to work on. So in essence, that's one of the first things we do with the team. Say, they're all important. Actually, for this team, our hypothesis, start here, start with purpose, start with agility, wherever it is, and get alignment from the team about, yes, this is why we believe we're going to do this work first. And then you can make progress and you can get runs on the board. So that's really how we help a team adapt, to say, get alignment on what are the 1 or 2 things we're going to start working on. Let's work them. Let's see the improvement, and then we'll move on to the next one. I have let's don't get over our skis with this stuff, because team development requires this gradual, resourceful, effort-focused work to build improvement step by step. It's nudge by nudge. You don't do it in one off hit. So that's really how we build, how we would really help a team build adaptability. And resilience, I think a big factor is just energy, right? We do more and more work with teams about what are our different sources of energy. How do we recognize when they're depleted? How do we help each other build the level of energy we need to fuel the resilience to do all the tough work we need to do? So different focus, but we work in both those spaces, and work in both those spaces quite a lot with the teams we partner with.
I find it quite interesting. Andy mentioned earlier that you have the ability to retest, and that's where that data-driven approach becomes really useful, because you can measure the success of the interventions and the work and the work that the inner and outer work that you're doing. Presumably, then, if you work on one habit, it kind of builds up the other 7, and maybe in different levels. You probably don't need to work through every habit then with an organization every single time. Of course, I'm sure they could. You may identify the most important habit to work on first. And you may find by the time you've gone through 2, 3, or maybe even 4 of the habits, actually, you've got so many other improvements across all 8 that you may find that actually there's enough there to not need to go through every single one. You kind of bring everything else up. Would that be correct? Because you can retest and reassess?
Couldn't agree with you more. So absolutely. We believe this work requires coaching over instruction. But the nature of the disruptive feedback, the need for challenge, the need to probe at a level of depth, and the role of the coaches is to do ourselves out of a job, right? So in essence, it's to build the skills, build the strength of the team, and then step back. And then the reprofiling provides the evidence of, this is really starting to work. This is really starting to work. Our stakeholders or the CEO are starting to see the efficacy and the impact of us working better as a team. Great, right? Call meta team when you need it, right? Not, we shouldn't be there as a crutch. And so it's the sooner we can step back from our perspective, the faster we've done our work. So we're happier.
So I think there's something that's really exciting there for those that are listening. Maybe you've got a preferred coaching partner that you work with, which is great. But actually, if you go through Diagnostic, rather than have your coaching partner come in and kind of tell your business what it thinks it needs without having that inner knowledge or inner working understanding of your organization, say, I think you've got a culture problem, this is what we'll do. Actually, you can use a Diagnostic to go to your coaching provider and say, hey, this is where we think we have a problem. Can you create a bespoke intervention that works on these things? Then we'll reassess. And you may then actually choose to work on more than one partner, potentially, depending on where their area of specialism is or their availability is. And I think that makes it completely different. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. That's how we work, Nick. So we partner with other experts in the space to best serve clients. We have our kind of area of expertise, and absolutely, it's about, is the client, is the organization getting the best expertise based on the challenges it's got to do, and where I think things are blended, the solutions are blended, organizations get the best of the best what the different people can offer.
We did a job recently where we looked at 21 teams within a single organization. And that was fascinating because what we could do is to then contrast and compare the 21 teams, looking at teams which were superb, real templates of excellence, and other teams which were slightly lagging behind, and also common habits within those 21, which were slightly below what would be, the ideal. So it's not just looking at single teams in an organization, looking at multiple teams can be very interesting as well.
Fascinating. So thinking about ahead then, Andy, I want to ask you, because you said you're all over the world, you get access to how learning development practices are evolving in the Middle East and in the UK and in Europe. What advice would you give to leaders who want to prioritize team development, but face budget constraints, but also want to make sure that they are future ready at the same time? You mentioned, where AI is going to go in the next 1 or 2 years. We want to make sure we're doing the best we can now to make ourselves future-proofed. What advice would you give?
Change the mindset of looking at a budget and say, we want to look at the investment. I personally believe that money spent on team development, if the team development is well designed from the very, very beginning, with the design intent of driving commercially realistic and relevant behavioral change, then any dollar, pound, or real is actually worth spending, because it's not a cost. It's not going to stay in the workshop. It's actually going to help to change your organization. And I think even if you have budget constraints, if you go to your CFO and say, look, if we spend this amount of money on team development in this particular way, I believe that these teams will be better suited to serve our business, achieve its growth ambition. And I think I passionately believe this. Chalk and talk training has no place in a modern business, because that is where training costs arise. But I do think experiential, very carefully designed and integrated learning interventions do deliver a great return on investment. I'm not talking about, it's going to give you an extra 1% on the bottom line, because that's impossible, because there's so many other pressures on the P&L. But you will see a commercial improvement in a team's behavior.
It's a bit like the hidden habits, right? There's hidden things you'll generate, maybe better retention of your staff, which is a real problem for HR because they feel like being invested in. Better relationships internally, which make you enjoy your work more. Maybe that brings that sense of fun back, Rob, that we talked about right at the start of the show. When we trust our teams more, we are able to have more fun and be more comfortable in our space. So, Rob, last question for you. If you could change one thing then about the way that organizations view team development today, what would it be?
I think there is a fear of recognizing that team coaching and team support will accelerate performance. I think there is a mindset of, I am a team leader. I've got this. I've been promoted. I should know this. I have the skills and the experience to get the best out of this team. And actually, if you look outside of the business world, collective efforts have team coaches, have that level of expertise that are actively sought out. That would be the one thing I would love to chip away at, that there is a much greater level of acceptance. So that when needed, and that's not all teams by far. I'm not saying that. When needed, I will go and ask. I will bring in some expertise that's going to give us the boost that we need in performance. That would be my one ask. Absolutely fantastic. And of course, for those listening that do want to find out more, I cannot recommend this enough. The research itself makes it fantastic reading. Go and visit metateam.co.uk. There will be a link in the show notes. You can go straight through to the website. There's some really, really interesting research backed by, as you mentioned, McKinsey in there, that Harvard study report. There's so much in there to really get to grips with that really helps you get under the hood and what team dynamics, what's influencing
team dynamics, and you'll learn more about those habits as well. I will also put a link, if I may, to Andy, your LinkedIn profile for those that have interest in finding out about how Meta is impacting in the Middle East and other areas. I know you've got many partnerships and channels that you can really support people on their journey if they want to explore Meta in more detail. Of course, yourself as well, Rob, if they want to find out more about the research and the science. So for those, please, I can't recommend this enough. Go and have a look. I started this journey when I discovered it, and I've found it nothing but unbelievably fascinating, interesting, eye-opening in particular, and I'm sure our listeners will find the same. So I want to give a huge thank you to Andy Perkins and Rob Shaw for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge in relation to data-driven development for teams. Absolutely fantastic. We've learned more today about the outer game and the inner game and the key habits that really can impact team performance. So thank you ever so much for joining me today. And of course, if you are trying to recruit any HR specialist talent, that's where my team can come in. There will be a link in the show notes there as well to jgarecruitment.com. We'd love to show you what a great HR recruitment experience can feel like. Without further ado, thank you once again, Andy. Thank you, Rob. I look forward to bringing you the next episode of the HR L&D podcast real soon. Thank you. This episode is sponsored by Deel. That's Deel. Deel is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel works for your team. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries in minutes and run payroll in over 100 countries in just a few clicks. And with Deel's suite of AI-powered learning and development tools, you can even customize career roadmaps, performance assessments, and more. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deel today. That's Deel.